It is I, Countess Van Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on Hunter the Reckoning in the World of Darkness. When we last left off, we've been diving into character creation. So today for you, let's move on from where we last were, your virtues, to your beyond. The edges and the finishing touches you're going to take. So the fact is, the virtues that I talked about in the last episode are a measurement of how much you're willing to fight against humanity's enemies, the monsters that are out there. And these virtues then connect to the powers that you use to fight this battle, to the edges that you wield into battle. That is what they are. Edges are the powers you will use to fight the monsters, to battle back against the darkness. Now, every hunter has a primary path of edges that they will take. This primary path is based upon their creed. The creed will tell you the virtue that your primary path is on. Now, this does not mean that, let's say, for example, an Avenger who has zeal. They can take other zeal powers. Their primary path is Avenger zeal powers. But for the other creeds, which are long zeal, they can take it. It also doesn't mean you couldn't take powers from another virtue. Just because my primary virtue is zeal doesn't mean I couldn't take some vision and then have visionary powers also. The possibility exists for me to have basically any creed's powers. It's just my primary powers are Avenger based, set in my primary virtue. In this case for Avenger, zeal. Though again, I talked about the primary virtue of all the creeds previously. You just have to have enough progress in those virtues to qualify for the edges you want to take. Now, your primary path does add a restriction to everything you can take. This isn't a restriction on the virtues you take. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the restriction on the edges you can take. The edges I can take, whatever is the highest level edge I have, is the maximum that I can have for any edge not on my primary path. Think about it this way. If I have a rank 2, a level 2 edge from my Avenger primary path, I cannot have another edge from any path exceed that rank of 2. Period. So I could start taking some, if I had the proper virtues for it, some martyr edges. But again, it could not exceed the 2 I have in my primary power. I would have to get a 3 in a power in my primary path to start getting 3 powers in other creeds paths. So that is the restriction I have. Avenger, or whatever your creed is always going to be my highest, or at least tied for my highest. Now, regardless if it's purchased from your primary path or another path, all edges are purchased with virtue points. You start with 3 virtue points when you create your character, and we'll explain later on how you'll be getting these virtue points, but assume that you need virtue points to purchase these. When I want to purchase an edge, I purchase it per level. Every level tells you how many virtue points it needs. Let's start with I was talking about a rank 2 power. I had to purchase that power at rank 1. That cost me 1 virtue point. Then I had to purchase that power at rank 2. That cost me an additional 2 virtue points. So for that rank 2 virtue that I have, that cost me 3 virtue points, which would be my starting virtue points. So you could start with 3 rank 1 powers or 1 rank 2 power as a starting hunter, because I'm starting with those 3 virtue points. So now I've created my character. Sort of. Pretty much. I have a good collection of numbers that, well, it doesn't really mean a lot. That's why we're moving on from these numbers, at least for a moment, to start developing what your actual, well, character is. What do these numbers mean? That's the first question you're going to want to ask yourself. Take a look at all the numbers you've put together here and figure out what they mean to your character. Where do you learn about them? Why do you have this skill, this background, this knowledge? Now, don't feel like you're required to explain everything on your character. But adding a little bit of storyline to all of these different traits that you have on the character helps to develop the actual person, the being that you're playing. It's not just paper with a bunch of numbers on it. It's an actual character that exists, that has background, that has history, that has life breathed into it. The book does provide also a number of questions you can ask about your character, well, that you would answer about your character, would be asked of you, which continues to explain and develop this so that I put together this character I can play that is its own being, so that I can understand how it would think and act when I'm playing as it in the course of the game. I can take on this role that I'm building. I'm putting all together this information that makes it easier to play this role. Once I'm finished with this, there are only a few little bits of stuff left, so little bits of number crunching, a little bit of calculations that we have to do to finish our character. First off is conviction. Now, conviction is basically the measurement of your battle against the horrors, your crusade against the monsters themselves. Conviction is what you use to fuel your edges, your powers. It will increase and decrease in points throughout your adventures as you use conviction to fuel your edges, and as you succeed at various tasks and regain conviction. Conviction, as I said, is what you're going to be using to use your edges, and as you successfully use your edges, use your conviction, it will decrease, leaving yourself with less and less conviction, which does leave yourself vulnerable. So it's a balancing act of when to use your conviction and when to wait for a more appropriate opportunity to use it, to put yourself forth in those battles. Every character has a starting conviction based upon their creed. It will tell you what you can start with. And you can use freebie points to raise that to a maximum of 8 in character creation. I'll talk about freebie points in another episode, but for now just know that 8 is the maximum I can start with, period. Now, we talked about your conviction. There is another important stat we're going to have to talk about right now, and it's based upon the life your characters had. The hardships they've had to endure, overcome, deal with, the negative emotions and problems of society itself has built into people a resistance to the world. A resistance to that. Their mundane lives have built in this resistance, and that is willpower. Willpower is the ability to get up, keep going on your day, no matter what kind of circumstances you're faced with, the darkness, the death, the pain, the suffering, and to keep on going, to keep on trucking. What this means for a character is I can spend willpower points in order to get automatic successes on tasks. I basically can, before I roll a die, add some successes to this task, because I want it to be completed. I want to be successful. Important thing to note here is that this is for mundane tasks. I can't use willpower on any kind of edge-based abilities, because that's conviction. Conviction is used for edges. So I can't use willpower on that. This is for, let's say I want to leap from a rooftop to a rooftop, and I'm probably not going to make it. I could spend a willpower to kind of push myself harder to make sure I leap between these two rooftops, because maybe my athletics would not nearly be good enough to be able to do this. I can use that willpower to push myself above and beyond the circumstances I normally can and gain success on actions. Now, you start with a willpower of 3, and you can raise it with freebie points when we're building your character. So you could start with something a little higher than that 3. Willpower represents the hardships you've faced, your personal drive. So if you are going to start with a higher willpower, just like if you're going to start with a higher conviction, you should add some kind of story behind why, or at least a reasoning behind it. If your life had a lot more hardships to it and you faced a lot of things that would have you overcome them, then yeah, maybe your character starts with a higher willpower because you've faced these dangers and pushed forward to a better point in time. But that's it for today. So, I introduced you to... I went over edges with you. I talked about what edges are to a degree and how you're going to be selecting them. Then I talked about some finishing touches you're going to take. I talked about building your character, the actual character to your character, your essence, your life, making your character a little more life. And I finished up with talking about conviction and willpower. Two important stats which do have a base value you're going to start with, so there's not a lot of calculations, but you could spend freebie points to increase. Now, that's where we're going to move into next time. Freebie points. What they are, how you're going to spend them, and we're going to move on from there, kind of finishing up the basis of character creation and moving into talking a little bit more in depth about some of these other things. But I hope you're having a great day. If you have any interesting stories of combinations of either interesting edge combinations for a hunter, maybe you took a smattering of everything, or you were super focused on one, those are cool stories, or some great reasons to have high conviction or willpower. Great stories behind those. Great stories behind those. I'd love to hear about them. I love to hear about your characters and your adventures in the comments below. But I hope you're having a great day. Remember to check out my Discord, my Twitter to contact me, my Twitch to see some of my live action stuff to check with me, and my Patreon for some extra support. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.